Are the brains of people with ADHD different than the brains of people who don't have ADHD? It seems they are. One of the differences that seems to persist into adulthood in adults who have ADHD symptoms is hypoactivation of certain brain areas. Hypo means less, so less activation is noticeable on scans that record activation of different brain structures when these adults are doing particular tasks. One of the areas where we see less activation is called the ventral attention system. Ventral means below. The dorsal attention system is the one that's involved in goal-directed activity. So when we're focusing our attention, the dorsal system is activated. The ventral system, the one that is not as active in adults with ADHD, is an unconscious system that activates when there is some salient information in our environment that requires our attention and usually a behavioral response. The person's attention orients to that particular stimuli. So you might be driving and a child is playing on the side of the road and suddenly moves into the road. It is your ventral attention system that will notice that and act accordingly. So if that's not as active in adults with ADHD, it might underlie some of the inattention problems that they have. It may be that adults with ADHD, once their attention is engaged in a certain task, it's harder for them to notice salient things in their environment, like their spouse calling their name, the phone ringing, the alarm going on the stove because food is ready, or even the smell of smoke because something's burning. That's conceivable to me, and it certainly happened in my life that I have missed important things. I remember when I was waiting for the bus and I was reading some novel. It wasn't such a deep read or anything, but I didn't look up until I heard my bus. So this enormous bus had pulled up, opened its door, waited for me. I did not look up because I didn't even notice the bus. And I didn't look up until my bus that I needed to be on was driving away. So that would be a good example of my ventral attention system not reacting when I needed it to. Another difference between the brains of people with ADHD and people who do not have ADHD, especially in adults, is they have hyper, so more activation in the default mode network. Sometimes this is called the diffuse mode. But in day-to-day life, what does this mean? The default mode network is the brain activity that is going on in the background when we're not actively engaged in a task. It's responsible for a lot of problem solving because your whole brain has lit up and it's drawing on all your knowledge to solve problems. And so we might use it by thinking about a problem before we go to bed and letting our default mode network work on that problem overnight. It's also involved in creativity and those eureka moments where the solution to a problem suddenly comes into our mind. It hasn't come out of the blue. Our default mode network has provided it for us. So if our default mode network in the ADHD adult is more active, that means that when we are trying to focus our attention on a particular task, when our dorsal attention system is active and we're trying to do something singular, more of our brain is active in the default mode than really would be if we didn't have ADHD. That means that we are probably going to have a lot of different ideas that may be irrelevant to the task at hand. We might be more distracted by those ideas, so we may end up allowing our thinking to go off on more tangents. But on the other hand, it also means we may come up with more creative solutions to problems, or in my case, we might recognize patterns more easily from very different pieces of information. Whether or not it's a strength or a weakness probably depends on the person and their context, but it is a fact that adults with ADHD do seem to have hyperactivation of the default mode network.